Billy Ray Taylor stepped out toward the well as the last of the evening light drained from the fields. The countryside around the farmhouse slipped into the thick Kentucky dusk. The air was heavy and warm, the woods unnaturally still, and the quiet pressed in so hard that even the distant insects sounded too loud. He paused, glanced up, then blinked and rubbed his eyes, certain his tired vision was playing tricks on him. Beyond the dark line of woods, low against the horizon, a bright object moved in a way that didn't fit the sky. It wasn't blinking like a plane, and it didn't streak like a meteor. It glided, steady, controlled. And as it shifted, it shimmered with color, like light sliding over polished metal. For a moment, it hung there, bright enough to outline the treetops. Then it began to descend, dropping behind the woods and out of sight, as if it had settled somewhere just beyond the property. Taylor stood frozen, waiting for a crash that never came. There was no impact, no burst of sound, no sign that anything had met the ground. Only a faint hiss, distant and persistent, like something venting. Then, he suddenly got that cold, instinctive feeling you get when you're not alone out there. And through the woods, something was closing in on him. Taylor hurried back to the farmhouse and told the others. They were tired, and the idea of something unusual in the sky felt too distant to turn into real fear. Elmer Lucky Sutton listened, but the first few minutes felt ordinary enough to convince them. The strange light wasn't anything to worry about. Then the dog started to bark. It sounded normal at first, sharp and territorial, then it became frantic, panicked. It stopped suddenly, and the dog slipped beneath the house and refused to come out. That alone was enough to make Lucky Sutton and Billy Ray step outside again. They barely made it into the yard before Taylor spotted movement near the tree line. A small shape stood just beyond the reach of the porch light, upright, watching, almost still. It wasn't a crouching animal. It wasn't someone bending low in the dark. The proportions were wrong, even from a distance. And as it shifted forward, the light caught its head and eyes in a way that made it look like it was reflecting the house back at them. Lucky Sutton raised his weapon. The first shot shattered the calm, echoing across the fields as the figure reacted in a way that didn't look like pain or panic. It seemed to recoil unnaturally, as if it folded backward, then disappeared into the trees with no obvious sound of retreat. For a moment, the yard went quiet again, and Sutton and Taylor stood staring into the darkness, waiting for footsteps, for a body, for anything that would make sense of what they'd just done. They retreated inside, and that's when movement appeared at the window. And with that, the feeling that this was a single mistake, a single fright, began to drain away, replaced by something colder and far more terrifying. Because whatever was out there had not run, it had only repositioned. The figure at the window rose slowly into view, as though it had all the time in the world, lifting its head just enough for its face to catch the light from inside the farmhouse. They saw the eyes first, bright with reflection. The kind of shine you might see in an animal at night, except this wasn't low to the ground, and it wasn't moving like an animal. The head looked oversized. The arms looked too long when they shifted into view, and the hands, if they were hands, seemed to end in something sharper than fingers. Sutton fired again. The blast tore through the screen, snapping the thin metal and sending it vibrating, and for a split second the window was nothing but noise and scattered motion. When the chaos settled, the figure was gone, leaving behind no cry, no thud, no scramble through the leaves, only the silence returning like it had been waiting its turn. That was when the fear started to take shape inside the house. Not a quick jolt, not a single scream, but a slow realization spreading from person to person that this wasn't something passing by. This was something that could approach, be confronted, vanish, and then come back from another direction, like it was learning the angles. Over the next hours, Lucky Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor would claim the same pattern repeated again and again. A shape at the edge of the yard, then gone. A head appearing near the window, then gone. Something high near the roofline, then gone. Each time, the men fired. And each time, the figures withdrew in that same unnatural way, as if bullets didn't land the way they should. At one point, Billy Ray stepped onto the porch to scan the roofline more clearly, trying to make sense of what kept appearing above them. And that was when something reached down from the darkness overhead and brushed at him. An elongated hand, thin and claw-like, touching his hair as casually as if it were testing whether he was solid. Taylor lurched back with a shout, and Sutton fired upward into the overhang. Whatever had reached down vanished instantly, leaving only the gunshots echo and the certainty that the space around the house had become crowded, with unseen movement. And still, they didn't rush the farmhouse. They didn't charge the door. They appeared in different corners, calmly and repeatedly, forcing the people inside to react, until reaction turned into exhaustion. The siege wasn't a single moment. It was the slow grinding down of nerves, the steady pressure of being watched, approached, and tested in the dark. By the time they finally decided to flee, it wasn't because they'd proven what was outside. It was because they could no longer bear waiting for it to do something worse. They gathered the children, piled into the cars, and tore down the road toward Hopkinsville, not looking back. Chasing the only thing that felt stable anymore. Lights, people, and the promise that if they told the police, then whatever was out there would have to stop. But as they sped away from the farmhouse, the woods remained black and silent. And the most unsettling thought followed them all the way into town. If those things wanted to keep them there, they would have. The drive into town was frantic and disordered, headlights cutting through the darkness as two cars sped down the narrow roads. Inside, children cried and clung to the adults, while Glennie Lankford tried to keep them calm, her own voice shaking despite her efforts. Lucky Sutton and Billy Ray said very little during the drive. Whatever adrenaline had carried them through the night had burned away, leaving behind a hollow, rattled silence. When they reached the police station just before 11, the reaction they got was immediate. Officers later recalled that the group didn't look like pranksters or attention seekers. They looked exhausted, frightened, as if they'd been running from something that hadn't stopped chasing them until the moment they reached the lights of town. Lucky was the one who spoke the most. He told the officers that something had surrounded their house for hours, that small figures had kept appearing from the woods and on the roof, and that no matter how many times they fired, the things never stayed down. Billy backed him up, describing the glowing eyes, the long arms, the way they moved unnaturally when hit. The officers exchanged glances, unsure what to make of it, but the situation was serious enough that they couldn't ignore it. Armed civilians firing weapons for hours in the countryside was reason enough to investigate, regardless of what they believed about the cause. Within minutes, a small convoy formed. Hopkinsville police officers, county deputies, and later state troopers drove back toward the farmhouse, their vehicles spreading out along the road. Some later accounts say military police from nearby Fort Campbell were notified as well. Though what mattered most in that moment was that the authorities were finally going to see whatever remained. When they arrived at the property, the house stood dark and quiet. No figures moved in the yard. No shapes watched from the trees, and no sounds came from the roof or the windows. Officers searched the area carefully, moving through the fields and along the tree line where the object had supposedly descended. They found no craft and no scorched earth. What they did find was evidence that the night had not been imagined entirely. Window screens were torn and punctured. Holes marked the walls and frames where shots had been fired, and spent shell casings lay scattered across the ground. Everything pointed to panic and gunfire, but nothing pointed to what had caused it. The officers stayed for hours, combing the property and the surrounding land, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the woods remained silent. The fields stayed empty. By the early morning hours, the sense had settled in that whatever had frightened the family was no longer there. Eventually, the police left. The farmhouse was quiet again, the night thinning into early dawn. Every person involved agreed on one thing. Whatever they encountered that night was intelligent enough to approach slowly, retreat deliberately, and leave no trace behind. And that was what made the silence afterward feel so wrong. Because silence, after hours of being watched, doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something choosing to wait. In the years that followed, investigators, skeptics, and believers would circle the same question again and again. What happened outside that farmhouse? One theory suggests they encountered nothing more exotic than owls. Large nocturnal birds with wide wingspans, reflective eyes, and an uncanny ability to move silently through the dark. In the chaos of fear, shadows, and gunfire, an owl rising from a tree or landing on a roof could appear grotesque and unnatural, especially when seen only in flashes of light. Yet this explanation falters when confronted with the repetition of the encounters, the way the figures seem to approach deliberately from multiple directions, and the strange consistency in how they were described. Others point to mass panic, a shared psychological episode, fueled by an earlier sighting in the sky. Fear can distort perception, stretch time, and fill gaps with expectation. In this view, the glowing object Taylor saw may have primed everyone to misinterpret normal sounds and movements, turning the woods into a stage for imagined threats. But panic alone struggles to explain why so many people maintain their account for decades, never fully recanting, never reducing the night to a simple mistake. Then there are those who look beyond psychology and animals toward the timing and location itself. Hopkinsville sat near military installations, in an era when experimental aircraft and classified tests were not uncommon. Some speculate that the glowing object and the figures were connected to secret projects, their appearance distorted by darkness and fear. Yet no records have ever surfaced to suggest anything was tested in that area that night, and no explanation has ever been offered for the creature's bizarre movements or apparent resistance to gunfire. And finally, there are some that suggest the object in the sky and the figures in the yard were part of the same event. that something unfamiliar descended, observed, and withdrew without leaving evidence behind. That the beings never attacked because they didn't need to. They were simply present, watching, testing, and learning. The farmhouse eventually returned to being just a house. The fields grew quiet again, and the woods reclaimed their silence. But on certain nights, when the air is heavy and the trees stand too still, it's hard not to imagine that whatever approached that yard in 1955 didn't vanish at all. It simply learned how to hide, and that the only reason it stopped coming closer is because it's still waiting out there, somewhere in the woods.